Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs kicking off fall camp. And look, I get it's early. We are a practice into fall camp for Georgia. If I'm a Georgia fan, like you're hearing all the right things about the right players going into 2025. And that's the story for Georgia going into the 2025 year. Like, look, we know there's talent on this roster, but there's not a ton of known commodities. We're trying to figure out who are going to be the difference makers that step up for Georgia in 2025. That's what fall camp is for. When you look at some of the most important players to hear positive buzz about, I feel like those are some of the players that you're starting to hear some real traction for during the start of fall camp and coming out of summer workouts. Want to get into those names? Talk about what it means for Georgia rolling into 2025 before we do, and as always, to the Georgia fans, appreciate you guys. It's been one of the more fun off seasons to talk this Georgia football team, not only because they're doing a great job on the trail, they do that every single year, but more importantly, that there's a lot of questions, but a lot of potential answers on this roster, and it's going to be really fun to talk about it in fall camp, kind of figuring out what this team going to be in 2025. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And by far to me, the biggest storyline here, Noah Thomas sounds like he's putting it together. And look, I'm trying to be intentional in terms of how I'm phrasing that. Putting it together, meaning we have seen the flashes from Noah Thomas during his time at Texas A&M. Never really felt like he had the quarterback play around him to kind of maximize what he could be as a pass catcher. But we all know, hey, 6'6", 200 plus, legitimate ball skills with the football in the air. To hear Noah Thomas standing out in the wide receiver room, and then you think about Colby Young, Noah Thomas, and Zachariah Branch, and how dynamic those three pass catchers could be for Georgia compared to what they were trotting out in 2024. If you're a Georgia fan, that is such a monster storyline going into 2025.
And especially because one thing I feel like Gunnar Stockton's getting this tag of like a skillless or a talentless quarterback who can't really do anything with the ball. Like, I go back and watch that Notre Dame game, which is really the only sample size we got from Gunnar Stockton. He threw some nice deep balls. Like, Georgia's wide receivers didn't exactly help him out in terms of making plays for him, but there were some nice balls down the field vertically. And you said Noah Thomas has never like had the system or probably even the quarterback to really take advantage of his skill set. I think that's a very fair thing to say, because I'll be honest, when Noah Thomas went to Georgia, I was like, that's like a fine move, but is he really like a guy? Is he a guy that Georgia needs? Because you knew they needed some guys who could make plays.
I think we said that for both Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch. And like that was so intriguing about the two wide receivers that Georgia decided to go out and get is, look, there were more proven commodities in terms of wide receivers that were available in the portal. Georgia goes out and gets Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch, two wide receivers that have just about as much upside as any wide receiver that you saw in the portal, if not more, but were guys that haven't always put it together.
And it's like you think like a Barian Brown or a Dane Key or an Eric Singleton. There were some really good wide receivers who Georgia didn't really seem to go as hard after as guys like Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch. So that is kind of the interesting thing. Again, Zachariah Branch, to me, like, there's certainly still development that needs to take place as a wide receiver. So that'll be kind of a big thing I feel like I'm tracking this spring for Georgia. Like, how comfortable are they being able to get him touches that aren't just like purely manufactured screen passes like what he had at USC?
Well, here's what
Thomas, a guy we've seen enough from to, I think, especially when you consider the system he was working in. If Georgia can play with a little bit of verticality, I think he'd be good.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, when I said Noah Thomas didn't have enough around him last year, that was not necessarily a shot at Marcel Reed. It's just not. I think Marcel Reed's actually be a pretty dang good quarterback this year. It's just that's not his game. Like, Marcel Reed's a twitchy, short, intermediate kind of guy, ball out quick. Noah Thomas, a big body that wants to work vertically down the field. I think there's a little bit of a better fit with Noah Thomas playing for a quarterback like Gunnar Stockton than it was with Marcel Reed at Texas A&M. The other thing you're hearing is a little bit more multidimensional. And that was probably my bigger concern with Noah Thomas was felt like at times a little bit of a one-trick pony. Like, I'm 6'6", 200 plus, and I'm just going to work vertically down the field. Can we get a little bit more depth from you at the wide receiver position? Meaning, can you do a little bit more than just be a vertical guy? Sounds like we might be getting that. This is what excites me the most, though. I mean, you talk about Noah Thomas and Colby Young and what they can do working vertically down the field and how opposing defenses look. If you want to play with the safety in the box, do it at your own risk because you got two big body wide receivers that can work the boundary just about as good as anybody in the conference. Well, if these defenses want to play two high safeties, there's a lot of space, not only for the run game to start going, and that's going to be a massive storyline for Georgia, but also still Zachariah Branch with the football in his hands. Ain't many people more dangerous than him. I like how the wide receiver room is constructed. It's one thing to have a lot of talent in the room. It's another thing to have a lot of balance and a lot of different skill sets. I think Georgia has the different skill sets to maximize these cats in 2025. Next biggest storyline, arguably the biggest storyline, and that is, hey, we're trying to figure out who our difference makers are on the defensive line. And the Georgia fans who've been rocking with the boys throughout the summer know that's probably my biggest question. And I think the national media is kind of sleeping on this question. They go for the low-hanging fruit, and that is the wide receivers sucked. Are they going to be better in 2025? Yes, that's a question. I think they have the ability to be better. When I'm looking at Georgia, can they dominate the defensive line like they've had the last 5 years? Georgia had 37 sacks last year. They have to replace over 30 of those sacks going into 2025. Jordan Hall generating a lot of buzz. Best he's looked since his time at Georgia. Elijah Griffin continues to just fly under the radar. To start hearing some of these names sounding like they're popping for Georgia. Because look, my concern with the defensive line was not the talent. I know how Georgia recruits that defensive line at the high school ranks. My concern was you haven't necessarily seen these guys show they can dominate in the SEC. You're starting to hear that from Georgia from fall camp. That's what stands out to me the most.
Jordan Hall to me is next factor because I feel like you feel really good about McLeod and Kristen Miller, especially like Kristen Miller. I think he's
We
going
know
to
him.
dominate. I think he'll have a great year, and I
Yes.
think you're deep enough. But I think you look like is Jordan Hall going to be that guy? Like he
Agreed.
came in with so much hopes. Played a little bit as a freshman. Frankly, I thought it was a pretty disappointing campaign from him, and I don't know that I saw the flashes like where I was like really excited about what he could do.
He's been banged up. You know what I mean?
So
So it's like
because last year he did take a big step, but he's like a guy again to be the guy you want him to be. The step's going to need to be another big one,
yes.
but he's kind of one you're looking at like Nasir Johnson, Nnamdi Agboko, like Jordan Thomas. Those are solid players. I think.
Agreed.
I don't think any of them are going to be absolute monsters in that defensive line. Like to me, it's got to be Elijah Griffin or Jordan Hall. One of those guys does need to like step up and be a difference maker.
Yeah, because they're the guys that when you start going through and look, Nasir Johnson, Nnamdi Jordan, they all have the ability to go play on Sundays. But when you start talking about like replacing some top 20 NFL draft picks and guys like Jalen Walker, guys like Mykel Williams, when you start looking at the potential top 20 picks, it's guys like Elijah Griffin, it's guys like Jordan Hall. Those are the guys that have the ability to really wreck games from Georgia. And to hear that they're taking that step, that's huge. In my opinion,
like he's just got to play more athletic. Like that's the thing. I think you're looking is he look healthier and like play healthier and look more athletic.
Because look, the pads ain't on in fall camp, and so you're hearing good things about what the body looks like. And I get you can't win football games by how you look. Why has Georgia been so good the last 5 years? Because they look a little bit different. They look a little bit different than everybody else in the SEC. Well, it sounds like Jordan Hall's getting there. Here's the X factor for me is Elo. Like what is the transition I should say look like for Elo Madozi coming from Army to Georgia? You're hearing the right things. I will start buying I've already bought stock in Elo because I went back and watched him at Army and I know what this kid can do.
Well, I love pass rusher stock, but Georgia doesn't play guys who can't play the run. Like we've seen talented pass rushers be passed up in favor of guys who are far inferior as pass rushers and don't have the talent. But are going to be tough against the runner, are going to play physical. Like Damon Jones is kind of the guy.
Damon Wilson.
And
I'll say the same thing for Jalen Walker, going back to when he was a year two guy. It was like, this guy is by far Georgia's best pass rusher, but he ain't playing that much because I don't think he was there against the run. Now, got there against the run last year, played a lot, became one of the best players in the sport. You're right. What does he look like taking on blocks and being a presence in the run game? is probably the storyline for Elo going into.
Frankly, if he's playing in fall camp, that probably means he's close because I just like don't think Georgia plays guys who can't do it. So it's like if he couldn't do it,
Look,
then
we
he's
got to figure it out. The pad's got to come on before we start figuring out with Elo in terms of what he can do against the run. It's one thing to look good in the workouts. We'll see what it looks like when the pads start coming on for Elo. Dill, Chris Cole getting some pass rush opportunity, something we've talked about a lot. When you start looking at how you replace all that pass rush production, we're looking at Justin Williams, where we're looking at Chris Cole and say, hey, those are some options. And I don't trust the coaching staff any more than I trust Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann to figure out how to get their best football players on the field. Look, Chris Cole, Justin Williams very well could be top 11 players for Georgia on defense. Unfortunately, they're not top 5 players or top 2 players with CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson. How you get them on the football field, it sounds like we're getting creative with how we're using some of those cats. That's another answer for Georgia in terms of replacing that difference-making pass rush production that you're losing from guys like Michael Williams and Jalen Walker in 2025.
And you have 4 guys who have to play. Like Justin Williams and Chris Cole are not the starters at that inside linebacker position, but like both those guys needs to be on the field. You got to find a way to use them.
You gotta. And here's the last storyline that I have. Michael Eini pushing Dan Calhoun for that starter. And here's the thing that I kind of noted is, as much as people are talking about like Georgia has to replace a lot on the offensive line, like we're going into fall camp. I think 4 out of your 5 starting spots are already figured out. Monroe Freeling and Ernest Green, where you hear really good things about both of them. And Dill, it's a sneaky storyline. Like as much as like Georgia's offensive line was probably a disappointment last year, Monroe Freeling, Ernest Green, both playing healthy ball in 2025. You're talking about 2 guys that if they go in the top 50 of the NFL draft, I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, that's probably where I'd put my money. If you told me Monroe Freeling and Ernest Green, they stay healthy throughout 2025, you're probably looking at 2 top 50 NFL draft picks. Drew Bobo, starting center. Micah Morris. I think he's one of the better guards in the country. Who barely plays. I shouldn't say that. He played a decent amount, but many people don't know him. I think he's one of the better guards in the country. You only got one position you got to figure out, I think. That's Mike Eini versus Dan Calhoun at that right guard spot. As much as like people want to talk about Georgia and question marks on the offensive line, I'm sitting here in fall camp saying, I feel pretty dang good about what they're going to be trotting out in their deep. I don't know if they had the depth they wanted.
Because frankly, if I didn't hear battle with Calhoun, that probably means Eini isn't like in the game, if you will.
Yeah,
I think that would have concerned me a little bit because then like, who are your backups? Like, is it Juan Gaston?
I think he can play, man.
Daniels, I feel like probably still needs a little bit of time, if you will, in that Georgia like strength and conditioning kind of system.
Right.
I look like if Daniel Calhoun and Michael Eini weren't battling, that probably would concern me because that would like. You say deep. I don't think that's wildly deep if one of those guys isn't kind of ready to go.
I agree. And Juan Gaston's working at tackle, but I think he's a guy that can give you value at guard. I really do. We'll see how that plays out.
You probably want him to be able to play tackle because like you kind of got a third guy with Bo Hewley, but like you probably want 4 tackles.
Yeah, and I think there is some versatility. Juan Gaston going to play tackle. Apparently, he's getting that body right. Going into year 2, like next year, I think he'll be very much ready to take the reins, but I think he can provide value as a freshman. We know he's physically gifted enough and physically big enough to provide value. We'll cut it there. This is one of the more fun fall camps if you're a Georgia fan. Not necessarily because this is the best roster that Georgia has had. It very well could be, but it's not necessarily right now on paper. But they'll like go back to last year. We like knew what this team was going to be. And they didn't really turn out to be what we thought they were going to be, but we kind of knew what it was in fall camp. Going into 2025, like there's a ton of positions up for grab. There's a ton of players that you're looking at to take that step. I am fired up to talk about some of these fall scrimmages and really get a feel for, hey, what's this team going to look like when we kick off in 2025? Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.